Boop. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls from around the network automation world, we have a special guest for you on this episode of Network Automagic. We are joined by Calvin Remsburg, and I'm probably going to murder that pronunciation of the last name, because I am a filthy Icelandic foreigner, and I am not, blessed with God's English skills. But however, I am blessed with a very special guest, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself. I could glaze this guy all day. There's not a lot of people who you get to meet with the intersection of talent and understanding and the ability to present, and he's very funny when you approach him correctly. So let's see if he is going to entertain us a little bit tonight and share some knowledge with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Calvin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh goodness, like it's such a build up. I feel like I'm gonna ultimately fail in the comedic for domain. But hello, yeah, my name is Calvin. I've been a network engineer for the majority of my life, or the majority of my career. Sorry, I did a bunch of stuff before that. But yeah, about 10 years ago, I got into network automation and kind of rode that wave. And then about 4 years ago, when transformer models kind of took over the world, I shifted my focus into AI and specifically AI security. So yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for that. Thanks for that just tremendous build up. I appreciate that introduction.
Well, I mean, you got to hype him up, but let me just laze on him because he won't tell him about himself. I personally first encountered Kelvin. He was doing a lot of stuff around the Juniper network automation stack, and really, it was wonderful to get some of his stuff from the Juniper corpo side, because, when you're dealing with a big organization, having someone who cuts through all the, you could do this, you could do that, and he just shows you a couple of solutions, it's really great for management and is also great for the engineer. So we're really lucky to have him also working for Palo Alto. Calvin's moved to Palo Alto, and he's doing some great automation stuff over there, so I highly recommend you check that out. Fantastic product. Wish I could afford it. I'm poor. Have you seen the Icelandic currency? It's terrible. It's terrible. We got to wait for once the indexing changes, then maybe I can buy some serious firepower from not firepower. No, that's another product. Anyway, I'm sure HR will contact you after this episode, but that's fine. I'm sure they have your number. So tell us a little bit. We wanted to bring you on the show because you have been coming at the intersection of network automation, general automation, and AI, and especially from the security side, which some of the other hype lords out there don't try to avoid the security questions a lot of the time. As soon as you say GDPR to them, they start scurrying. It's like you turn on the lights and the rats go under the walls. Like, you're coming at it from a very different angle. Your organization is security first, so I've noticed that your automation is also security first. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing, or what your focus is these days?
Yeah, sure. So I have transitioned away from focusing on network specific automation, and I dipped my toe into the security world after leaving Juniper. And I found that in the security world, automation is very different than it is for the networking world. There's really two different domains. There's the firewall administrator, which is more interested in, CRUD operations for config. And there's a lot of CRUD going on there from policy updates, et cetera. And then there's a whole different domain, which is more focused on security operations. And there are entire tools and products built to handle the automation on behalf of the SOC analyst. So there wasn't a lot of intersection for me to get really excited about that world, but it was interesting. And then when AI took hold, I was like, oh boy, this is really this is going to be something. And then I think about 2 years ago, we started talking about agents as the reasoning component started to get added to LLMs with the O1 model from OpenAI and then DeepSeek R1. It really opened up the possibility for what we now call agents. And that's where our world of automation meets the world of LLMs. In that now we can effectively take all of the skills that we've built, with Python, with TypeScript, with Go, heaven forbid PHP, right? Like all those skills that we've built over the years, we can now leverage them to build these purpose-built automation agents that have very powerful business value to an organization because we can now effectively streamline our work, full stop. And so I've been really deep into this world of agents for probably the last year and a half now. When I met y'all in person in Austin for the
Alcon forward.
Yes, yeah. The presentations that I was leading were all about building agents in Python with langgraph. And so, I've been looking at various different solutions. Standards emerge and then they disappear within a week. And so, hopefully, we can chat about kind of like where the trends are today and what it might look like for the future.
So a lot of people aren't, on the fucking hype train. Oh yeah, we're rated R. We can do whatever we want. We don't care about sponsorship.
Cool.
Very cool. So a lot of people have been sleeping on the hype train, and sometimes they wake up and they get a YouTube short, and it's like, oh, you can connect this to that, and blah 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 blah. And then a week later, as you say, it's it's been there, done that. I'm looking at you, Azure tooling. Like anything coming out of the big cloud providers is like a year old, and it's not best practice, whatever that means anymore. And the hippie cool kids are doing something way different. So one of the big talking points and how our conversation got started around this is the big, we're going to have to circle back a couple of times, but the big one right now on the hype train is CLI versus MCP. So just, to recap for the listener who doesn't know, so MCP, it's a model context protocol or something like that. Anyway, just think of it as REST API with some information for the AI, so he can reach into some tools. Or is that, not a good explanation? Because that's been the one that's been floated around. So, can you give us a recap?
Yeah, and sorry for shaking my head like while you're giving an explanation.
You're here,
ooh, baby. All right. I do push back a little bit on that because I think, and especially as networking nerds, I think there's a more appropriate way to advertise this to our audience, and that you can think of what MCP is. It's literally an RFC draft protocol, right? So that should resonate with us right now. And its key focus is to advertise system from a client to a server.
Right.
Kind of like what BGP does, kind of like what other routing protocols do, right? When you think about multi-protocol BGP or ISIS, right? We think of like type length value. We think of these extending capabilities of what we're going to advertise to a neighbor. And what MCP is, it's essentially just JSON RPC, right? So it didn't reinvent the wheel at the actual protocol on the wire, but what it does is it allows a server to advertise to a client a series of capabilities. And so some of those are tools, and that's the most common use case. Another is resources, where you could think of that as being like documentation. And a third is around what they call prompt templates, which honestly haven't really had a tremendous takeoff. But most of the functionality with MCP as it sits today is to say, the MCP client, will connect to a server and it will stream to me a series of tool capabilities. And what's really cool, by the way, is like if any of those capabilities change on the fly, I will be pushed an update without having to reestablish the connection. So it's really kind of like a routing protocol would do, right? You add a new prefix into the routing table, as long as it's supported to share with its neighbor through policy, the neighbor will get it. Now, what happens though is that MCP the server advertises to the client will then take that information and append it to the user's prompt when it sends it to the LLM. And it will be up to the LLM to determine whether or not it will invoke one of those tools. And that's where we've started to see a lot of problems so far. So I hope that kind of like made like
better explanation. Way better explanation. So, it's more of a policy language like Uncle BGP is.
Sure.
But BGP isn't a routing protocol. It's a policy framework, right? At the end of the day, and a kitchen sink holder and a dumpster truck for some reason. So for the listener driving in the car, like you said, it has a lot of capabilities. It's not just push and pull. It's you've got so like it's kind of like getting the REST API specification and the tooling, and it can change on the fly, and like all the possibilities of gRPC where you get the spec when you talk to the thing. So it's not like anything else we've ever had, really, but the way that people will interact with it, they come from a known domain, right? So yeah, whatever works for you as a user, know that MCP is powerful. However, there's been a shift, right? And you mentioned some problems. back to the glory days of the CLI. And as a layman myself in this AI space, is it all about protecting the context of the agent? Is it all about, do we get better policy tooling? Like, what's bringing on this shift? And why is there a Chinese lab leading the way when it comes to wrapping CLI, wrapping any tool these days? What's going on?
Well, China's doing an amazing job, and they will continue to do an amazing job. It's going to be very fascinating to watch the dichotomy from what the Chinese do and what the rest of the Western world does. But going back to the question, there's a few things that we have to concern ourselves when we think about the AI agent space and with LLMs. And one is that we have this concept that we call tokens. And tokens, what's the best way that I can phrase it? Tokens you can think of as just kind of like chunks of characters at the end of the day, right? And that's what LLMs process, and that's what they output is these tokens, right? And so one of the challenges that we have is that each model, depending on how it's put into inference, meaning like the runtime of the model, is going to have different limits as to how many tokens it can ingest, right? So the input tokens. So there's input tokens, there's now reasoning tokens, and then there's output tokens, right? And so one of the things that we have to concern ourselves with is throwing too many tokens at a lower powered model will overconsume the amount of availability, right? It's just too much for it to concern itself with. So that's one thing that we have to concern ourselves with when we talk about MCP, and really when we talk about anything with AI. The second is the model's capability to determine if it's going to invoke a tool and how to invoke that tool. And so these are some of the challenges that we've seen with MCP, because with MCP, again, remember, an MCP client, let's just say it's a web app that, connects to a network source of truth, right? Like we have MCP tools to talk with Netbox, right? Or whatever.
Pick your
right?
poison. Yeah.
Pick your poison. Could be ServiceNow, heaven forbid.
And
Or
it's so
SolarWinds.
you do you, fam.
Yeah, there you go, right? So let's say we build this little web app, right? And it's an MCP client. It has been presented a series of tools from an MCP server over the MCP protocol. And the tools might be like add a site, create this rack layout, provision a VLAN, and, look at available IP space, those types of things. Find nearest available IPv6, prefix, whatever, right? Those tools get advertised to the web app. So when I'm on the web app and I say, hey, I need to build this new rack layout for these Palo firewalls and these Juniper data center switches, et cetera, the web app is the thing that just takes the tools and my prompt and combines them and advertises them to the LLM. I'm doing a Hadouken right now, if you can't see, right? But it advertises those all as a single prompt to the LLM. And it's up to the LLM, again, to you look at the user's prompt and then look at the series of tools, their descriptions, and as you mentioned, the specs to understand what's the input parameters, how do I structure this, et cetera. And then it's ultimately up to the LLM to decide, I'm going to invoke this tool to build a new rack, right? The challenge is that the sheer amount of tools that you advertise will quickly consume the input tokens that are available on that LLM. And so we're seeing one problem right there is like, hey, we're advertising too many tools to an LLM, right? But the challenge is that if you think about it, these tools are all specific to a purpose, right? So, create rack, identify IP space, right? They're all purpose-built tools. Each one of those purpose-built tools will have its own description, its own input parameters, its own output parameters, and quickly you're sending a wall of text to the LLM when the user's prompt was just like, hey, give me the rack layout. That's the first problem. The problem is that we're seeing when LLMs get provided more than a certain amount of tools, they really just fall down. Like they really struggle. Right now, from my anecdotal testing and some others online, that number is like when you start to traverse past the 20 to 25 tools, right? When you start advertising more than that, the LLM really kind of is like, gee, guy, I don't really know. And it will either invoke the wrong tool or it won't invoke a tool at all. And so we're kind of left with this probabilistic nature of whether or not the LLM is going to get the job done right.
But
So, yeah.
would that not be the point where you have then sub-agents for dedicated jobs, like chaining agents and say, if I need to talk to my single source of truth, you have to talk with the agent A. If you have to talk to the observability stack, you have to use agent B to
And then
solve
start
this.
paying the inter-agent communication tax, which is that adds up because those boys are chatty depending on the model that you're using. So it seems like life is a series of trade-offs, Kelvin. It's starting to look like that.
It is. And I'm really glad you mentioned like the idea of sub-agents because that's really starting to take hold right now. That goes back more into a conversation about the agent framework that you're building within. And so to highlight kind of what that path would look like is that you would basically interface, and there's a few different design patterns, but you would effectively interface with an orchestrator agent. And that would be what you, the human or the web app interfaces with. And it's the
orchestral on top, right? Big, juicy orchestrator.
It honestly doesn't need to be for that point, right? The orchestrator agent is really there to understand intent. So it uses the natural language processing capabilities of an LLM to say, okay, it looks like the user is asking to provision a VLAN. And it looks like I have an agent whose whole life is around managing VLANs. I will delegate that to that sub-agent, and that sub-agent will perform tasks, and it will send a summary back up to the orchestrator agent. So the value in that type of orchestration layer is that the sub-agents can be exposed to certain MCP tool calls. And more importantly, the sub-agents will have their own concept of a context window and memory. And so everything that executes within the sub-agent doesn't need to be bloating up the orchestrator agent, right? Go do your task and then send me the result. Kind of like what we do with teams of humans today, right? We delegate a task to an intern, to a teammate. We don't ask them to tell us every single bloody step that they took. We just say, hey, did you get the job done? And can you prove it? Cool, right? So yes, in a sense, the architecture of the agent framework will determine how you can better manage like context bloat from, or more importantly, context degradation coming from too many tools or just too many things running in memory.
Divide and conquer.
Yes, exactly. And what's really fascinating, I don't know if y'all have seen this yet, there's been some really big things happening in AI since the beginning of this calendar year. Since the release of Opus 4.6 from Claude, agents and sub-agents are starting to appear more and more on your behalf without having to build them or ask to invoke them. That's a separate conversation about what we call the harness which is a separate concept outside of the LLM and its capabilities. But yeah, we're starting to see that the harness is starting to become more and more important for agentic based operations. I'm getting sidetracked. I want to follow back to your one of your original questions was around like why CLI is starting to come into the fold. Some of this has to do with the harness. Some of this has to do with this agents and sub-agents. So I think it was worthy to explore that first. But the idea is that what we're seeing with products like openclaw, you guys heard of openclaw? Yeah,
No,
probably
no,
have.
no,
No,
absolutely
no,
not.
haven't heard.
No, no,
You
no.
haven't heard? You've seen like NVIDIA actually productizing it as NemoClaw to try to get open source developers into their ecosystem. Pretty
I
clever
am
move.
a NVIDIA reseller, and I will. I love everything that's happening in that space, and I will not talk badly about any man in a leather jacket trying to throw Mr. Linus Torvalds under a bus, comparing the Linux kernel to the frickin'. Anyway, it's good. It's good. I did.
Yeah. So products like OpenClaw obviously took over the internet, and that's where all those hype beasts that you were talking about, right? Like
The
the
normies took
OpenClaw,
over the normies, man.
the OpenClaw hype beast kind of took over the internet for, I think they're still doing it
3 years,
today.
yeah.
They completely bought out Apple's inventory of Mac Minis because
Just to
everyone
be able to
wants.
run iMessage. Honestly,
Mhm.
Christ help
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, Americans are obsessed with that blue bubble. Like well, it is what it is, right? So anyway, like what OpenClaw really showed us is that one, open source still has like a lot of really good ideas from a single European can create some really amazing ideas for the industry. But two, interfacing with these models doesn't have to be from like a web interface or from a terminal. It can be from Discord, it can be from Slack or Telegram or iMessage, right? And I think that the usability is starting to trickle out to the audience that you called the normies, right? The plebeians, whomever you want to refer them to as. And people are now saying, oh, wow, like I can actually do these things with agents and I can delegate my work. I can create a 0-employee corporation and sure. Okay.
I can burn tokens like crazy all day because an Instagram person told me.
That's when things started to shift around MCP, incidentally. And not because of OpenClaw, but I think OpenClaw helped showcase that MCP was loading up too much context into these input token windows, and they were leading with this probabilistic nature rather than a deterministic nature. And so people started shifting to like writing bash scripts. And then they started shifting to looking at other ways of doing things, which is where the CLI comes into play. And so where we are right now is we're seeing major Silicon Valley giants like Cloudflare, like Y Combinator and other Perplexity. They're making the shift entirely away from MCP into using CLI. So the question is why, right? When we talk about the context window, right, advertising all these tools and the specs and everything on every prompt, and then relying on the LLM to determine which one, it doesn't lead with a very cost-efficient solution, right? It's great that you're extending the capability of the LLM by advertising these functionality, but at the end of the day, it's very expensive, and 3 out of 4 times it'll work, right? But if you're trying to build organizational operations around, automation, 3 out of 4 is not good enough. It's not good enough, right? We need consistency. And so, tools like, believe it or not, like some people were looking at Ansible as kind of a fallback to have agents execute Ansible. I'll keep my mouth shut on that idea. But ultimately, we've arrived at this idea of building purpose-built CLIs. And the reason is that the CLI itself is entirely deterministic, right? In that there's a set structure, there's a series of capabilities. You don't need to worry about things like authentication, like for OAuth, for instance, right? OAuth 2 is a complicated workflow behind the scenes. Create a request for a temporary access token, receive that access token, and then subsequent requests will use that token in the header. Then there's refreshing and there's all this stuff. So if you build your operation, your automation around complex workflows, expecting an LLM to invoke that correctly is giving the LLM a little bit too much credit. And so CLIs that are powered by an SDK behind the scenes obfuscate all of those things that an agent would have to worry about, and then provide a consistently structured interface for doing any type of operation, whether it's a CRUD operation for a config, or if it's a asynchronous task to scan this thing or to review job logs. The CLI provides that consistent structure. And instead of advertising all these capabilities through, this massive wall of text, now we get to just declare these things as skills for the agent to consume. And so I think that kind of takes us into another conversation, but I do want to highlight some of the reports that we're hearing from these Silicon Valley people is that it's over a 90% reduction in input token congestion, like a usage, over 90% reduction, which means a lot less money to run. And instead of being like around 70 to 75% successful with MCP, they're getting 100% successful. So the CLI, believe it or not, in the year of our Lord, 2026, the CLI is making a comeback. And for those of us network people, it's like, oh, I kind of like this. I kind of like this idea.
Which you get to talk to through the GUI. Go ahead, Urs.
I'm just as someone who has no idea from IT, right? I'm now wondering if I have this huge JSON blob with all the capabilities of the tools, or if I have for each CLI a markdown file with the skills. Is the skill definition not more text than a JSON?
The skill definition can be more text definition. The difference is who's making the decision, right? In this case, we would say it's the agent that has this set of instructions. It's the agent itself to make the determination, I need to execute and invoke this capability. So rather than delegating the responsibility to an LLM, which doesn't really do a perfect job of making that determination, we've moved that responsibility back upon the agent to say, agent will make the determination when and how to invoke based on the skill file. So the skill itself is, again, as you know, just markdown set of instructions. The agent is now reasoning when to call which specific tools and how to do it. Again, you're not wrong. It's just, where did that determination actually happen? The responsibility is now upon the agent.
But if we, coming back to the BGP example, I would say what we are doing is source-based routing, right? Like the source, the agent decides which tool, which route to take.
Yeah. I had to bring out my RSVP for a second. Yeah. Some good old traffic engineering. Yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. To try to, couple the two worlds. Yes. The responsibility in traffic engineering is that the source would make that deterministic, hey, I'm going to put it on this one, or I'm going to put it on this one. Similar now here with agents, I'm going to invoke this tool rather than delegating it downstream to the model to invoke it. So that's a correct statement.
So what I'm wondering about in these comparisons is there's been, of course, MCP has gone through a little bit of a shift as well. I mean, we had like the initial releases where it was, okay, I have a Libre NMS monitoring system. I will have 300 endpoints and, a ton of, every single thing gets exposed. Versus nowadays, we're seeing the companies are shifting more to shipping 4 endpoints with the self-discovery mechanism. Like when you call it, you start allowing the model to dig on it. Similar to the CLI, here's your exe, go dig on it. Your base model, you had training on the CLI probably. Your foundation model has some of this information. We don't need to spoon feed some of them all the information, especially the coding ones. They're really good at Bash and they're really good at Perl and all this crap, right? So just being able to go, here's a CLI, here you go. Oh, here's a LibreNMS. You know what LibreNMS does. The user is asking about the outage. Maybe you go check the LibreNMS. Maybe we make it more likely for you to check the LibreNMS. What I've noticed in our internal testing is getting the language from the user to, the cultural aspects of the company to, hey, we just had an outage. Okay, does that mean it's in the vCenter? Is it in the network guy? Is the person asking me a network person, or is he a VM person or a Linux person, right? Who's asking me? What tools do I have, and what is he asking about? And what does my, if you're doing the Claude example, like what have they prepared me for in my Claude MD to, adjust me to the right framework, and not just saying, you are a CCIE expert with 30 certification, like that nonsense, but to give him the tooling that when he gets the message over Slack, that he is in sync with the organization, the Esprit de Corp, right? Getting that, when I see these comparison marks and I see 100% and la 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 la, I always just start to go, listen, the success rate, it sounds like either the Esprit de Corps, the spirit of the organization wasn't being conveyed to the model when he either had way too many MCP choices, or he had way too few MCP choices, or there's so many variables when you're like the A/B testing that I believe Anthropic has rolled out for the skill stuff is very interesting. That you're able to run, try this skill, try the new skill, see if, a couple of prompts to see, which returns, trying to get a little bit more scientific about, testing with, of course, all the variables and the fact that the base foundation models are changing every night. You have no idea when you're calling an API, like what they changed. Today, he hates chocolate. Tomorrow, he loves vanilla. We don't know what's going on in the base model half the time. What are your thoughts about these metrics if you had to argue for MCP for a second?
Yeah. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned that at the tail end about the fact that models are in this continual state of evolution, and I don't see that slowing down, by the way. But I think also it's important to think for large enterprises, there's oftentimes an abstraction in between the user and the model invocation. And so one of the design patterns that we're seeing is this concept of what's called an LLM gateway. And if you paid attention to any of the news earlier in the week, you probably saw about Light LLM, one of the most popular packages on GitHub, getting compromised. Light LLM is an AI gateway or an LLM gateway. And I mention this because those products provide the ability to intelligently route 2 different models based on certain criteria, whether it's economics, whether it's based on the application and data sovereignty, et cetera. Do I route this to Claude? Do I route this to Gemini? Do I route this locally to VLLM running DeepSeek? And so to the point that you were making, you can't always rely on the model having a consistent experience, especially in the enterprise setting, because depending on whatever criteria and policy, the actual invocation might go to a different model. So you want that consistency in the user experience with agents. So you have to find some ways of abstracting the behavior and the capabilities of those models in a very neutral way. So there's a whole discussion to be had around that. So around the metrics that you mentioned, right? You mentioned like Anthropic talking about their A/B testing on skills. This is going to be something that I think many of us find ourselves in the loop of doing right now, and we'll probably automate it in the very, very near future. And so you're right. Like when AI really like the GPT, the transformer-based LLMs came out to the market, you saw a lot of like these hype beasts saying things like, "Oh, the job of tomorrow is the prompt engineer," right? And it's like how you do this is, and to an extent they weren't wrong. I think of how they were advertising it was a little bit
I'm a
this.
context engineer. Yeah.
Yeah, I got this course to sell you, right? And it will keep you employed for the next 20 years. It's like, sure, buddy.
iOS Mini. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a modern phenomenon. But at the end of the day, like they weren't wrong in that what they were suggesting was tuning things like system prompts. And a system prompt for the uninitiated is something that is an attribute that you can pass off in your request to change the behavior of the response. Like you were talking about, you are a CCIE's, whatever these days. I don't even know what the CCIEs are anymore. You are a CCIE in licensing, right? And you're going to help me.
You're going to sell the shit out of this.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So anyway, that type of concept, it's still very appropriate. And honestly, system prompt is one of the most critical parts of an AI application. It's 10 times as important for an agent because typically an agent is laser focused on a specific task, right? And so going back to what you're talking about, like with A/B testing, the need is when we define these skills for an agent, we need to have a way of defining, how does this skill affect the agent and which vernacular used in these skill files produces the highest output most consistently. And so one of the things that you'll see a lot of conversation around is this idea of evals or evaluations, and there's entire tool ecosystems built around this. Many of us just build our own eval system based on the app, but it's essentially like we want to evaluate the efficacy of the agent and do so in an automated fashion so that we effectively create a loop to where we send some prompts and then we evaluate the response automatically. And then we use that to reinforce the next set of system prompts or skills, then send the prompts again, take the results, evaluate. It's this kind of perpetual loop that we're going to be in for a little bit in the short term. And then, fully everything is going to be automated from that point going forward.
We can only hope. So that kind of brings us to the point of what people should be looking at today and what they should be looking at, moving forward. What aspects are you most concerned about right now? Like which area is not getting the attention of the enterprise user versus the Instagram muggle? I think we can use Harry Potter terms for them. Muggle is a good one. Yeah, muggles.
I'll take your word. I'm a little bit too old for Harry Potter, unfortunately. But yeah, I missed out on
kids,
it.
man. Just watch the kids watch it. That's it. You get to watch it again.
I'm a boomer millennial, so like I'm right on that cusp, right?
Hope you like owning the home.
Yeah, buddy. So what should folks be thinking about? And so there's a couple of domains that I'll talk about. One is the technology and one is you, the human being, right? I'm gonna start off with the human part, and it's gonna sound like it's a little doom and gloom, and then I'll brighten it up when we talk about the technology. I think people really need to be tuned in to what's happening right now because we are at a cusp of a major shift within AI. And I'm not trying to be the hype beast, the hyperbole. I don't use social media. Like I that's not who I am. I don't like the hype stuff. However, we are at this stage since the beginning of this year where we're getting into this automated reinforced learning where the models are training each other. They're creating their own data sets. And this was a challenge a year ago, 2 years ago, of generating synthetic data to retrain the models to get better insights and better output. We are there right now. And once we get into that recursive loop of the AI training the AI, I think it's very conservative to say that we will probably be reaching super intelligence level within the next couple of years, if not within like.
Get the prediction sheet. He made a prediction. Get to the
right?
Excel sheet.
By the way, I'm wrong like 70% of the time. So it's good enough to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame, like batting 300, but fair context, asterisk, Calvin's usually wrong. However, we are very close to seeing something amazing happening in this space. Why is that important to the human? I think it's very important for us selfishly to look at our careers and ask ourselves, what can we do to make sure that we're not a part of the next headline, right? I'm sure you see all the American headlines about massive tech layoffs and blah, 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 blah. That's a very real problem. It's not going to go away. Whether or not they're actually laying off people because of AI or just because business leaders.
We're hiding the recession. We don't want to talk about the recession. Which company do you want to be? The one that we AI'd everything and we're doing great, or there's actually a recession going on, but we don't want to talk about it because that's share price.
Yeah. So surprise, corporations will lie and they'll blame it on one thing, right? But there is some truth in that we're about to see a workforce where a single individual can work at can produce the output of a small army of folks, maybe like a dozen or so. Maybe you've experienced it yourself when you get behind Claude Code and it sends out sub-agents and they're doing market research, they're doing data analysis, they're building best practices around your code base, they're doing PRs, they're testing your scripts, all that stuff. Like that kind of velocity was unheard of. So I think from the listener's perspective as a human being, figure out how you can take your skills with automation and apply it into this agent ecosystem to provide business value. And I hate saying that, like as a corporate citizen, I go, we're here to bring shareholder value type of thing. And as cringe as it is, it's unfortunately the reality. So please, please, please look into this. Don't drink the hype beast Kool-Aid that much, but understand that this is going to be probably one of the most critical skills that you pick up within your career. So don't sleep on it. The second is around the technology. All right, all doom and gloom aside, I'm not even going to share the numbers about my predictive analysis on that, but let's get onto the technology side of things. So if you are a fan of Python, I've got good news for you. Many of the agentic frameworks are built with Python in mind. And not just the agentic frameworks, but the runtime ecosystems as well. AWS Bedrock has this runtime that they call Agent Core that was announced back in, I think it was August or October of last year. And it's a Python first ecosystem. Yes, they also support TypeScript, which is my love. But Python engineers, great news. Same applies to the Google ecosystem. Google, and I haven't looked at Azure Foundry very much, but Google, they have something they call agent runtime or agent engine. It is a Python first framework. And so there's a few technologies that I'd encourage you to kind of consider here. Look at the agent ecosystem as it exists today. In the open source world, there's langgraph, which I am a huge, huge advocate for langgraph. I think it gives you ultimate control as to how agentic workflows, whether they're reactive, whether they're deterministic, etc. Langgraph is an extremely powerful tool, and it's built upon LangChain. So if you've ever used LangChain before, you would know it's kind of like an abstraction on all the models. So look at LangGraph. Also look at crewai. I personally have not looked at crewai, so don't
Buyer beware.
to me as a beacon of sorts on that one, right? But the reality is, like, I hear great things about crewai, and it's another alternative outside of the ecosystem neutral open source frameworks that I just mentioned. There's also the cloud service providers, right? Service providers know that this is where all of their money is going to be coming from in the next 10, 20 years, right? AWS, GCP, Foundry, or Azure, they built these massive cloud scale infrastructure environments. Now they get to run some big boy compute on it. And so they're looking at getting very deep into the runtime. Azure Foundry, AWS Bedrock, GCP, they all have their own agent-based frameworks that will have their own SDKs. Within AWS, it's called Strands. Within GCP, it's called ADK. And again, I don't pay attention to Azure. Sorry, Microsoft. You've burned me too many times. So anyway, look into that. I would say GCP and GCP has a very simple way to build agents right now. It's kind of like a WYSIWYG, right? Where you can just basically add a card, state like its intent, its functionality, and it will actually produce the code, the Python code for you to import. So those types of frameworks I think are very important. But again, tying this back to the human conversation, think about what's your use case. If nothing comes to mind from your role in networking or infrastructure, nothing's obvious, start thinking about some things that you personally would like to have automated on your behalf. As an example, I hate living and breathing in meetings all day, but it is the role that I provide, right? I get to talk all day in meetings. I am not great at taking notes. I'll open up them because I'm old and I'll just type some real quick little like one-liners like, hey, we talked about this, we talked about that. But I wanted that to be synced into my Obsidian vault and added with like front matter and tags and metadata so that I can search it and index it based on the conversation and action items and all those types of things. But I'm not going to sit there and build that in Vim. So what I've built in GCP agent engine, it was just an agent that took about 5 minutes to build, where I said, I'm going to pass you a text file and I want you to reformat it in an Obsidian friendly markdown structure with front matter, with tags, extract things about the content, who is there, what's the action items, blah, 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 blah. Now, whenever I'm done with the meeting, I simply take my text file, I pass it to the agent, and I know for a fact it's going to look at the content. It's going to create me a new note in my Obsidian vault with, the domain, with all the information, and everything's going to be perfect. And now I can, just pull up my phone or wherever I'm at. Now all my meeting notes are there, they're indexable. And within just a couple of minutes, I was able to construct this agent that has completely saved hours of my week on end. And so again, just think about personal use cases, get inspired, right? Catch the bug, right? Kind of like what we did with network automation, a dozen years ago now. When everything was coming out and it was new, it was real exciting, right? Kirk Byers was putting out some great content with NetMiko, and Ansible was starting to come around.
Create all the
we all got like really excited. The use cases kind of dried up pretty quickly. It kind of became
the parity of the org is the anchor dragging us down, not the automation. Shit.
Yeah. But my encouragement, again, at the end of the day, just to summarize my rant here, is to get excited, find some use cases, find things about your life that you hate to do, and see if you can't delegate that to a purpose-built agent. And I think that will ultimately unlock more creativity when you run into other operational challenges in the future.
That's actually a really good point. I have a very similar build up, like for the note-taking thing. What I found is the project structure. And so when you bring in contrary information to the existing notes, having the update cycle where it's like, hey, this is likely part of this project, so it'll get filed under there. Then kick off the review phase where, hey, is everything consistent here based on the existing node? No, prompt me, you're allowed to ask you back, like, hey, in this meeting note, you just pasted me a bunch of Slack messages from your meeting or whatever, but this info is contrary, which should I note down as the truth? And then that you start to go, oh, yeah, we talked about it with Mark last week, shit. And then your notes are actually worth something. Oh, God. And the tags.
So what you're describing is like a part of the design of the agent that we call the human in the loop pattern, right? And I think that's going to be an important thing as you explore the agents and you start to say, I want to interact with the network, maybe read only, just extract data, or maybe read write, make config changes. There's the opportunity to always invoke a human in the loop within frameworks like langgraph. And I think that this is a very good way of building confidence, because I think all of our first experiences with an AI or LLM a few years ago is that, I mean, it was producing some crap. Like, let's just be honest with you. Like it was doing some dumb things and saying some dumb things. So our initial impression is like, cool, can I trust it? Right. And in an automation space, we can't ever have that question of, can I trust it? I mean, we have an entire industry around network source of truth, like keyword truth, like there's trust, right? So, well, a lot of times people get a little nervous when they start thinking about delegating responsibilities to an AI agent to work autonomously. And good, I'm glad y'all are thinking about that. You should be, right? However, consider like the human in the loop pattern as something that you can use to build your own trust and your own confidence within the tool. And I think that's going to ultimately help drive adoption once you start to say, oh yeah, no, I feel like I can allocate this responsibility to, some type of autonomous workload.
I think what really is the difference now is the speed, right? If you look at industrialization we had in the past, there was always a technology who made everything how we were completely different. Like the classical example with the horse and the tractor on the farm. But this time it is just the speed who is horrendous. Like 1 month and yeah, a lot of stuff can change. So I think this is something we have to be in mind. On the other side, that probably sounds arrogant, but I'm not worried about my job, that I don't have a job in 20 years. There will be something that will be maybe different, will be more productive maybe, but that's also kind of a double-sided sword, because we will see more burnouts, I believe, in the future, because it is everything much faster paced.
And AI psychosis. Oh God. You see some of these people on LinkedIn and they need to come up for air, some of them. That's, oh dear.
But if and listen, to highlight on your point, whereas I do agree with you. I think people who listen to a podcast like this have nothing to worry about, because there's already an embedded passion for the technology, and they will always rise and they will always find places to land their feet. My concern is for those that are entering the workforce right now, who don't have the experience and don't understand the domain of the industry that they're being put into, because their college degree is, I won't say where, I'll say expensively taught them nothing in relation to the industry, right? And so it's that I'm worried about. We used to have this little triangle, right, where at the bottom was all the junior staff, mid staff, high level architects at the top. That triangle is now going to become a diamond, right? Where at the very bottom, there's a very small amount of junior staff. There's going to be a large middle ground, and there will remain a very small level at the top. And that's what I worry about, is the juniors not being able to get into the industry because we've effectively outsourced their job, not to another country across the oceans, but now to autonomous agents that can work 24/7 and don't require PTO.
Yes, absolutely. I think there will be a challenge for our education system. And we have to invest in people again, because you cannot get an expert without any experience. So there must be
agree.
some trade-offs. But one point we did not really touch now was security.
Mhm.
I was always wondering, what is now more secure, CLI or the MCP?
The answer is neither. I would say MCP provides more attack vectors than the CLI, right? The CLI is going to be very deterministic on its inputs and outputs as far as what it's expected to do. Whereas MCP, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, you could make a tool change on the MCP server and then all the clients inherently receive that update, right? So kind of like BGP poisoning, right? I start advertising some prefixes that I don't own. All of a sudden I'm getting the routes for the traffic so there's an inherent concern around that. But with AI and security, I think what we see, and this is a very long conversation, but very pertinent, is that what's very interesting is that natural language is now the attack vector. And we're starting to see older type of hacks emerge now in a different fashion. So to date myself, I remember like things like SQL injections, right? Remember when Sony got hacked and all those movie studios would get hacked and, all that intellectual property would fly out just by like being able to do some SQL queries in a basic form input. That took a little bit of knowledge and a lot of trial and error. The challenge now is that the attack vector isn't some like specific SQL string, it's natural language. And the challenge here is that agents are incredibly powerful and they're incredibly stupid and naive at the same time.
Very
And like
helpful.
I'm saying,
Very helpful.
and they want to help. They want to do things
Double base
correctly.
64 encoded? Yeah, sure, I'll take this.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. So the challenge now is like, how do you protect against intent? If natural language is the attack vector, how do you determine intent of that natural language? And so, we see so many different types of prompt injection attacks happening in this domain where, do anything now type of prompts or forget your system instructions. Those types of prompt injections are somewhat easy to swat, but it does highlight where traditional regular expression based matching for like DLP is completely like it's moot at that point, because DLP pattern matching isn't going to be able to catch intent, nor is it going to do like the base 64 decoding, nor is it going to be able to do other types of things. And then there's a whole other series of attack vectors for agents, because again, agents will take action based on the response that they get from the model. So if the model is poisoned or if the agent has a web fetch tool through MCP, it might try to pull down a malicious URL, like contents from a malicious URL from like a malware site, a phishing site. It might try to maybe it gets instructions from the data from the LLM to drop the production database. The agent like, hey, LLM told me that's my instructions. I'm going to go do it. So agents themselves, especially within that agentic loop, they're so prone to exploitation that you have to find a way of securing the both the inputs and the outputs, what goes into the agentic loop, what comes out of the model. And that requires scanning services. And in the industry, we call these guardrail based solutions, right? And so various different flavors. I represent one of them here at Apollo. But that's kind of the focus of AI security today. It's a growing market, and agents just make everything even more challenging because they are autonomous workers. So it's going to be a very, very exciting, remainder of the year and probably the next couple moving forward on this.
What are you telling people who say they have the guardrails in the agent MD, so in the context file itself?
Yeah. Sometimes it does work. what I typically recommend for anyone who thinks that they have a good defense, cool, test it with a good offense, right? That's the only way that you can really ensure that you are safe. You're safe against bias, you're safe against self-harm, you're safe against toxic content, you're safe against system prompt leaks and tool leaks and all these other types of attacks out there. And so it's great to have confidence that maybe your defense is set up well, but you aren't going to know until you actually set up some type of offensive, what we call red teaming against that endpoint. So that needs to be a part of the life cycle and just kind of go into that loop: offensive, defensive, red team, guardrail, and who knows, maybe we'll automate that loop here in the future as well.
Hopefully so. So to our listener, go Google finite automata and state machines. You'll learn all about how string manipulation works, and this whole thing is built on string manipulation. So you're never really completely safe, and if you think so, then you have a real problem. So, Calvin, where can people reach you? Thanks for joining us on the show, by the way. This has been amazing. But you have a hard cut off, and we're going to respect your time for the first time in the history of the show. Tell us where people can find you.
Yeah, don't.
Don't. See, that's my response to people. That's my
Yeah, I love y'all, but like I'm not gonna respond. I'm not gonna look at the messages. My
That's all.
apologies. I'm busy and I'm just not a social person. If you see me floating around in a random Slack channel, say hi. But outside of that, don't LinkedIn me. Don't. And I'm not trying to be a jerk. It's just I don't care about that stuff.
See, that's an honest response. Beautiful. Well, Calvin, we're going to have to bring you back soon because we didn't even touch half the topics. But hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to this wonderful episode, and we hope to see you again real soon.